This is my presentation on the effects of high school makerspaces. So getting started, to define what a makerspace is. According to US News, they define it as a place for hands-on learning with tools for creativity. Every school's makerspace is different, but you might find a wood shop 3D printing, audiovisual equipment, and hand tools. This is only one perspective of makerspace, as it's a real blanket term. So PC Magazine also offers another perspective that it's a place for collaboration and people to come together, to work together to produce things. So getting into why are engineers important? So according to the National Academy of Engineering, engineers offer the opportunity to improve lives through innovation. This is very important as many of the innovations that we're using today come from engineers and scientists working to better develop and give a quality of life to us. On top of that, according to Engineers Canada, engineers are key in protecting the public and its interests through military development and things of that nature. All this is very important in protecting us and allowing us to operate as a country. This leads me into the purpose of this entire research. I'm trying to find more ways to bring people into engineering by studying the impacts of early interactions with through high school makerspaces. This leads to my research question: what are the lasting effects of introducing high schoolers to makerspaces? So getting into my literature review. According to Wilczynski et al., who did multiple studies across universities, they found in college environments it provides many helpful benefits to grades and learning. For example, they go into a deeper explanation stating that the hands-on activities provided through makerspaces give the students a better understanding as they're learning through multiple different senses in their body. Next, in a study done at Vanderbilt, they found that the classes done within makerspaces keeps the students interested and keeps them within that major for a longer period of time and causes less people to switch out, which is very important in keeping more engineers within the field. Next, in a study done by Jayden et al. At Yale, they found that makerspaces provide students with better opportunities to learn for many of the same reasons found in Wilczynski et al. Study, including the hands-on deeper learning experience while being able to identify what is actually going on in the things that they are making there. So getting onto a different part of the literature review, in a study done at Purdue, they found that skills taught within the makerspaces at the school are actually used within the entire engineering major throughout college and later down throughout their career. And then lastly, in a statement from Chow Wing, an electrical engineering professor at ASU, they found that the intro into engineering classes that ASU provides help students to decide whether or not engineering is the right field for them while still being able to have time to switch out to other fields or switch to another engineering major entirely. This leads me into my method. So at the school I attend, there's a class called Intro to Innovative Technology. This is a requirement to graduate, which means I have a nice big population of 1,400 students to choose from. So this class focuses on multiple aspects of engineering, including problem solving, which is used across all forms of engineering, and it's one of the most important parts. On top of that, it also introduces some of the engineering topics, including 3D design, coding, and manufacturing. Next, my data collection. So my demographics are freshman to senior in an anonymous survey distributed by teachers. This survey was based off of the findings found in my literature review to validate their findings in a high school environment. Next, I used a Likert scale to easily identify the overall arching agreement on the questions I asked, while being able to use those same values within correlational analysis to see any other connections that exist within the class. Overall, I had 220 respondents, with only being able to use 183 of them, because there was around 40 freshmen who had not yet taken the course, as it's a half semester course, or it's a semester-long course. Getting into my analysis. So, my analysis included averages of my Likert scale data to identify the overall consensus on the questions I was asking. This is very important in actually validating the research the research I found in my literature review and connecting that later on. On top of that, I used a Pearson's R correlation to identify relations among the data, and for that I tested 6 different variables with 3 present in the presentation today. Which leads me on to my data analysis. Starting off, one of the first questions I asked was whether the class helped you understand if you would want to pursue a major in engineering down the line. Overall, the average Likert scale value was a 3.27 with the overall agreement of 48.1%. This shows that most people did think that the class did help them decide or know if they would want to pursue engineering down the line. Next, I asked people if the class was inspiring or discouraging to them, and made them, and overall people answered that it was actually inspiring, but not by a large majority. Next, I looked to see if people enjoyed the class or liked the content. This is to gauge the interest overall in the class as well, but there was actually no large disagreement or agreement present, so no overall consensus can be drawn from this data. Next, I asked by the end of the course if they had a basic understanding of all the content that was covered. This is very important as for my correlational value and to see how that would compare to collegiate classes as well. Overall, there was a 56.8% agreement that yes, they did have a good understanding of the content after the class. Lastly, I asked if people use the skills that they learned from the class on a regular basis down the line. Overall, 69.4% of people disagreed and said that this does not help them, that they do not use the skills that they learned in this class on a regular basis. Which leads me into my correlational analysis. I first started by identifying if there was a relation between pursuing a career in engineering and whether or not you had a good understanding of the class. Overall, it was a very low, somewhat low correlational value with an average of 0.29, with the junior having the lowest of a 0.08, which was somewhat of an outlier. Next, I looked to see if there was a correlation between the understanding of the class and whether or not the class gave you insight into what engineering may be like. This did have a very mediocre correlational value with an average of 0.53, but the seniors having a very strong correlational value of 0.74. Lastly, I looked to see whether or not they would want to pursue a career in engineering and whether or not the class gave them insights. This was an overall mediocre value with a pretty even spread among all the classes of a 0.5 average. Which leads me into my connection with my data found in my literature review. So in the Vanderbilt study, where they found engaged interest present within the Makerspace courses and later down the line, I did not find the same interest value. They had a large consensus of yes, it did help and keep people interested in the topics later down the line, but I did not find the same conclusions within my data. Next, I looked to see if people did understand the class well and whether or not they had a good understanding of the content after the course. This aligns with Jayton's study at Yale, and yes, there was an overall agreement that people did understand the content of the course, which does validate that finding. Next, I checked to see if whether or not the class served as an indicator of whether you would want to pursue engineering, and this did help align with the ASU professor Chow Wang, where he also found that the Intro to Engineering classes present at ASU had the same effect. Lastly, I looked to see whether or not the students use the skills that they learned in the class later in high school, and I had a completely disagreement on that question, which was completely different from the things I found in my collegiate review from Wilsinski, where they found that people are using those skills down the line within college and then later in their career. Next, so that last part was probably due to high schools not offering more engineering type courses, at least the high school I did the test at, which causes them not to use those skills really. Next, looking at my correlational data, for the most part, some classes did have a pretty large discrepancy within the correlational value. On top of that, the insights that the correlational values provided were actually pretty interesting. So seeing the correlation between pursuing and understanding was actually being somewhat low was interesting, as because I would have thought if people had a good understanding that they maybe would be inspired by that and want to pursue that later down the line, but that was actually very low. On top of that, pursuing and insights had a mediocre correlation along with insights, but understanding and insights being strong, which I thought was pretty interesting. Now, what were the limitations of my study? First of all, my sample size was only 220 students of the 1,400 present at the school. This means I totally could have gotten more, and maybe that would have changed my data, especially if I had gotten more seniors, because most of my data came from the freshmen and juniors, as I found it very difficult to get the senior responses. And lastly, my questionnaire did have some flaws, which caused me to have to avoid those questions after looking at all the data. So what were the implications of my study? I evaluated the benefits of makerspaces, high school class makerspaces offered to see their effects that students would have later down on the line. I also identified there could be future research to identify the career paths that these students have, which I cannot do in my present time frame. Lastly, further research could also be conducted to see how a different class structure would affect these results, because the class is a self-taught course, but maybe a course taught by an actual individual might have different effects. My conclusions are, I had a nice big connection with, and I validated some of the findings that are present in collegiate environments. There were some good insights into whether or not pursuing education and understanding had any effect, and there actually wasn't. And I showcased the classes that this benefit on the engineering field, and that could bring more people into engineering overall.
Terrific, thanks Gavin. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions here and then we'll be done. For the first one, how did your initial exploration of the scholarly conversation lead to your final research question?
So most makerspaces only existed in colleges up into a recent time frame. This is because colleges were the only ones that could afford makerspaces. And so when I was looking at this topic at the very beginning, I could only find research on college makerspace environments. And so I did more research on that to see why, and that's how I came up with that conclusion, which helped me find my gap of looking at high school makerspaces.
Terrific. As a follow-up to that, what are the real-world implications or consequences? Who is this research for and what should they take from it?
So I think this research is for schools and individuals. Because for individuals specifically, they can help decide, by taking a class like this, they can help themselves decide whether or not engineering is for them, which will help them later down the college by either saving time by not having to change their majors, which can cause you to maybe stay in college for an extra year. Or it can help colleges by being able to help students by maybe either bringing more people into engineering by offering these courses, or allowing students to easier decide whether or not they would want to do it.
Okay, good. And then as a final question, if you could revisit your entire process, what would you do differently and why would you change it?
One thing I would do differently is adding interviews to my overall data. This would provide me with more reasons to why students chose certain answers and allow me to make better connections through correlations as to why maybe they chose, why they chose pursuing education high but their understanding low. And to see why there wasn't any correlation there. It would allow me to dive deeper into some of my insights that didn't have strong conclusions.